Right, good evening and welcome to this segment we call the Lifebuoy Saving Aquatics, one guest at a time. And on screen, we have Mr. Kervin Jean. Good evening, Mr. Jean.
Good evening, Jason. Good evening, viewers, listeners, I guess.
Right, so this Kervin Jean is the head of the UE Open Campus Sports Academy. I got that kind of right at least?
Yeah.
He's
Open
also,
Campus Academy of Sports, same thing.
Right. He's also a PhD candidate at the University of the West Indies for sports policy. And he also served as an administrative officer in the, not an elected officer, administrative officer working in the ASATT office from 2010 to 2012-ish. So, Mr. Jean, so we're here to talk a little bit about governance, a little bit about policy and framework, and how that will assist in sport development. So, just give us a brief overview of what you would define as governance and why a national governing body should be concerned about governance.
In the simplest terms, Jason, governance is basically the act of governing. It's how you go about executing the day-to-day operations of the organization, the country, the state, or whatever it is that you're in a position to govern. One of the key components of governance is having, one, the governance structure in place, and the support to that, your governing documents. And understanding that an executive or leadership team would not be in place 24/7 to offer guidance overarching guidance to whether it be the other executive members, club members, or what have you. So that way you have governing documents in place to guide individuals so they know what happens. Additionally, those same governing documents would dictate or mandate how the organization is to be run. Right. So for instance, if you look at swimming, you have your constitution. Your constitution dictate when AGMs are supposed to be had, what the election process is like, and everything else with regards to the sport. Similarly, the executive would be responsible for the oversight of the organization, but those governing documents would give that mandate to the clubs and everybody else so they know and they're aligned to the governance structure. What it means to the organization is that it not only facilitates formality, but it also enables them to have a formal structure and also enables everybody to know what their role is and how they should execute that role. With a proper governance structure, you have seamless operations. Everybody knows what the role of the executive is. Everybody knows what their role is as club members and everything else, and everything aligned to the organizational structure, as well as the mandates, the overarching mandates, whether it be via your strategic plan or operational plans. Everybody is aligned to that via that framework.
So it's a good way to communicate the document is a good way to communicate the rules and regulations. And so that, I mean, executive come, executive go. I mean, we update as we go along, but it's a guiding framework for us to operate within.
Right, and not just that, your constitution will provide that, but also those are the articles of association and bylaws would then give that extra, how do I put it? Those areas that are not covered by your constitution, your bylaws would cover them. Additionally, if you look at your strategic plan, which is your overarching plan, it offers then direction to the clubs and other affiliates so they know exactly how their operations are to be organized to align to the mandates of the organization or the association.
All right. And I know earlier this or last week, or it was Sunday, sorry, I had an article in The Guardian and you were talking about sport development. And one of the items listed was policy and regulatory framework. So how does a policy and regulatory framework assist and aid in the development of a sport?
The way it works is that your policy basically entails your overarching plan, the guidelines for the governance of the organization. So in the context of a national governing body, generally your strategic plan would take the place of your policy. Of course, you would align that plan to the national mandate, which is the national policy on sport. However, that strategic plan is more or less your policy. It dictates what will happen within the organization over the span of 3 to 5 years, whichever the length of that overarching plan. Within that plan, it also articulates what is the vision for the organization for that period of time. What projects you will be facilitating, what your vision, your mission. In fact, it details everything that the organization is going to be doing for that period of time. Within that framework as well, you would identify what the role of the various stakeholders are and how that role will be transacted, not only through the execution of mandates from the executive, but what is required of each and every stakeholder. With that in place, you have a direction. So for instance, if within that 5-year period, you say you're going to be you're going to be investing in capacity building, you're going to be working on facilities, you're also going to be facilitating developmental programs. Everybody knows there is a system in place, and that is what they can align to. So a club now would look at that strategic plan, look at where the direction is, where the vision and mission is of that organization, and align their operations to align to that. So if you're saying, okay, by the year 2023, you're going to have X amount of national coaches, X amount of technical individuals trained. Clubs can then know, okay, this year I have one academic, not an academic, but a technical program. The following year I have X amount of coaching programs. So I can then see which of my executive, which of my coaches can then be entered into those programs. So then I am aligned to the mandate. What it therefore means is that there is a plan. You cannot build a house if you don't have a plan. Now, you may be a skilled builder, and in your mind, you may say, okay, I don't need to write out the plan. I have it in my mind. Nonetheless, there is still a plan. And that is where you start off. That is where policy is important, that overarching plan. Without that, there is no alignment. And to use the local dialect, if you don't have an overarching plan, you are basically spinning top in mud. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that being, you see, sport, the various components of sport are interconnected. And just like the first part of the article, we spoke about having systems in place that facilitate practical sport development. Without an overarching plan that would seek to connect those various components, what you find, you may be placing emphasis on one component to the detriment of others. So for instance, you may say, okay, we're going to have a developmental program for 2022. You have that developmental program, you have about 20 or so administrators that attend. What next? What happens after that?
Okay.
So without that overarching plan that connects all of those components, what you find, you're just basically wasting money. Because if I ask you, okay, you spent, say, 2 million over a course of 3 years, and I ask you what came out of that 2 million, what was the impact on the sport? How far did it take your sport? How would you answer? Because you have no overarching plan, and that is where people make the mistake. They don't understand policy. It starts off with policy, and not just starting off with the policy, sticking to the policy with regards to implementation and executing it properly. And I think that is where our associations need to go, and that is the importance of policy to sport governing bodies as well.
Mm-hmm. So, Lemon, I know you work in aquatics for a little while. Is there any specific policies you think we should have in place?
I think you'll have the policies. Because I recall when I was with women.
No, okay. Assume. All right, let me take that back. Assume zero knowledge. All right, let me take that back. But what policy should an organization like us have in place?
No, it's simple. You start off with your constitution. You would have your constitution. That is where you align to the international federations as well as your regional federations. So you align to their mandates, whatever comes from FINA and the regional bodies, you align to that, as well as the various components of the national framework, you align to that. You have your constitution. And by other frameworks I indicate, so for instance, your child protection and other such legislation, you ensure that your constitution is aligned to that. More so, you want to ensure that your constitution is updated. A lot of NGBs haven't touched their constitution since the 70s, or even when they came out, when they were first initiated or recognized, a lot of them haven't done any work on their constitution. So that is a major aspect of that, your constitution. Next, you would have your strategic plan. Your strategic plan would articulate the vision, mission, and what are the goals and objectives of the organization for whatever period of time. Most individuals plan this, they have their strategic period for the length of an electoral cycle. Others seem to have it longer. In most instances, you tend to stay with the electoral cycle because most times when a new administration comes in, the first thing that gets kicked out is the strategic plan to replace by whatever they come in with. So that is one. Out of your strategic plan would flow your operational plans and other such dictates. So, you have a 5-year strategic plan, you're planning to do, say, X, Y, and Z components. So from that strategic plan, you have your operational plans for year 1, year 2, year 3, and they are informed by the components or the initiatives that are included in your strategic plan. So this is just the minimum framework for any national governing body.
So I have side-ish questions to ask you, right? Because I hear what you're saying, and I mean, it sounds good. And I mentioned this, I asked this before. We have so many qualified persons like yourself, right? And many other people coming out of the university, West Indies and Trinidad and Tobago in sport management. And I made some comments just now that, some organizations haven't made changes for decades to how they're structured, etc. Do you think we are getting the persons in to provide that support to the NGBs? Are the persons who coming out of the universities coming out and giving support to these organizations?
I think yes, but I want to stick up in there. I want to come back to that. But let's go with the yes first and foremost, because I know a number of individuals who I have taught, and everybody tells you the same thing. They have contacted a number of sport administrations wanting to assist. They're volunteering their services, but for some reason, the organizations don't really take them on. Now, some organizations do. They take that help because we understand that we work with volunteers most of the time, and that is needed. So some organizations would love to have persons that have done sports management or even one of the other coaching degrees that the university offers, which is coaching, kinetic, sport leadership, and management. Some do, but for the majority, I don't think we understand how to use those skill sets, to be honest with you. Because I recall at last year's conference, which TTOC puts on, the sports conference, there was a psychologist there, sports psychologist, and she said she contacted a number of organizations in Trinidad and Tobago trying to render assistance, and nobody, it's like she was speaking to mute people because they did not understand. And that is largely so because we haven't transitioned from that volunteer base to a more professional system of sport administration. We still focus on the executive and those little committees that we have to assist, not understanding that we need those support services, skilled individuals, whether it be physiotherapists, whether it be nutritionists, whether it be other sport administrators, that we need those individuals to assist. If we truly want to develop our frameworks and our governance centers, that we need those individuals for the support. Notwithstanding, we don't have the money to pay them, right? And that brings me to where I stuck the pin. See, there are opportunities that exist that we don't take advantage of. Take, for instance, we're in Trinidad and Tobago. There is the University of the West Indies. Not only the University of the West Indies, you also have the UTT as well, both of which have comprehensive sports programs. You have UE with about 4 or 5 programs, not as BSc programs. You have masters, you have doctorate in sport administration and the like. And I could go through all of them if you like. UTT has the same. And you're churning out hundreds of sport administrators and other sport professionals annually. In most instances, they can't get a job. Most of those individuals find work in other fields simply because we don't know how to use them. Now, we could put up, as the faculty can put up as many forums as possible, but if we're not listening, if we're not ready to take the step and expand beyond our current frameworks, then it's all for naught. The assistance is there, and they can actually take advantage of that by having a relationship with those organizations, whether you have interns on a monthly or biannual basis coming in from the universities to assist with sport administration. That would help them in terms of their research components and everything else. But again, most of the times those individuals go within those organizations, they end up doing administrative tasks simply because there isn't a structure to accommodate them at those levels. And I think that is the key issue we're having with administrations.
So pulling back a little bit to the regulatory framework, right? What are some of these symptoms of a poor policy and regulatory framework? And what kind of effects would it have on the sports development?
Oh, I think that is simple. If you cannot answer, if I ask you as an executive member, what is the vision and mission of your organization? What are your core objectives? If you cannot answer that, you have a problem. If I ask you, okay, what is your focus for the next 2 or 3 years? If you cannot answer that, you have a problem. And also, if I go down to the technical individuals, if I go to your national teams and I ask you, okay, what is your developmental framework like? What do you have in place? What is your developmental pathway? If you don't have that, then that is a problem as well. But in short, if you have a sport that doesn't seem to be progressing anywhere, Your teams aren't making it to any somewhat regional or international competition. You don't have a developmental pathway. You don't have any developmental programs. You don't have any community programs. If your executive are not functional, all of these are signs of poor administration. Not just that, but lack of policy direction and also a regulatory framework. Now, where the regulatory framework comes in is if you have your bylaws and your articles of association. So your clubs and everybody know, okay, AGM is X at this date. Elections are supposed to be this date. Election of new committees is supposed to be held on X, Y, and Z date. If that is not happening, then you have an issue. If clubs are supposed to be registered every year, and you know for 2-3 years no club has registered, then of course your regulatory frameworks are a mess. And likewise, if your bylaws are not adhered to, clubs doing what they want, individuals, then that tells you simply that, one, you don't have a proper policy direction and your regulatory framework is not working and it needs work. And I think you don't even, some of those symptoms I've actually articulated, you don't even need that. If you just speak to individuals within a sport and you ask them, okay, what are the major issues that your sport facing? And when they start rattling off things for you, depending on what they say, you can say, okay, from what they're saying there, then it has nothing to do with the sport itself, but it has to do with the administration. There's no policy and there's no regulatory framework. And that is something that is also, it's quite popular, to be honest with you. But we don't look at it. And simply because most persons are not made to account for it.
And well, you basically told me some of the effects on the sports development already. You answered that part as well.
Yeah, and just to add to that, simple. And you probably see it a couple times already. You ever notice that in, say, for instance, we had the conversation earlier. Look at swimming. Trinidad was basically winging everything up to what, 5-10 years back, right?
10.
Right. Where is the team now? Where are the teams now?
Well, we have not won a trophy since 2009.
Now, if you look at it, you could probably look at, okay, look at the systems that are in place now versus what you had 10 years ago. And that will let you know exactly what is happening. Because if you have that developmental pathway, you have those school programs and you have community programs, you have your national championships ongoing, then you have those pathways that facilitate talent identification and talent development. If everything was working and that was in place, you would be constantly supporting, or you have a feeder system into your national teams. When that stops, then you have a collapse of national teams. And we've seen that across many sports. So you see a sport one day, they're champions of the world. And come 10 years later, they're at the bottom of the barrel. Simply because we did not plan. There wasn't those developmental pathways, more so that recruitment and athlete development, athlete identification and development to facilitate that progression. And that is where we have the breaks, and that is the issue we're facing. Now, 10 years ago, Trinidad and Tobago did not have a national aquatic stadium now, did they? An aquatic center.
2016.
So, now that you have it, you're supposed to be performing better. And then again, you go back to the developmental programs and those developmental pathways. Are they in existence? And I think this is where some of the issues come up, and that is where we need to address. And that is why policy is important, because in your policy, you could articulate those so persons know exactly where you're going.
Because when I started to read the article, I reached the sports infrastructure and then I said, oh gosh, what's going on after here?
And that is the thing, you see, because you can't just focus on one particular aspect. Sport is malleable and all the components are interconnected. If you focus on one particular component and you disregard the others, then in essence, you're doing more harm than good, because you have development in isolation and it's not integrated into the entire framework. So eventually it will collapse. And if one component collapses, chances are a chain reaction will follow. Every single one will fall. You have to have those systems in order, and they need to be interconnected. You cannot have segmentation within a sport development framework. Everything has to be identified, and that is where policy comes in. You articulate the overarching plan, you make the connections within the various components, and then you follow through with that in terms of development. But if you have those breaks and this disconnect, then that means you have silos, systems developing or working in silos, and they're not interconnected. And at the end of the day, they serve no purpose. So you spend a bunch of money in one area, and at the end of the day, I ask you to account for it. You could tell me, oh, we did X, Y, and Z programs. Okay, you did those programs. How did that develop your sport? What happened then? and you can't say anything because there was no integration. You developed the individuals, but you did not reimburse them into the sport, the framework, to assist in other areas. You did not use them to advance your administration. You did not use them to advance your technical plans. And I think that is the issue we face now. The too many disconnects.
So just reading some of the comments, have some people say, I don't know why people are so afraid of the volunteers, free labor exchange for experience.
Oh, I can answer that. I can answer that one for you. And I can, from my days in ASATT, it goes back to then. Historically, there has always been this divide, or they have always been at loggerheads. That is volunteer staff and paid staff. Understanding that there's this kind of contention because most people look at it, okay, I'm volunteering, I'm an executive member, I don't get paid, whereas this individual comes in and is being paid. More so, within our sporting frameworks in the region, a lot of people tend to get into those positions for self-advancement. And of course, we tend to have somewhat, we put not boundaries, but we put fences amongst ourselves. So somebody who's educated, somebody who has vision, somebody who has drive, who wants to come and assist, that person is seen as a threat. As in, you'll come in, you'll work with me, and then at the end of the day, you will superimpose yourself on me, then you kick me out. And that is an issue that we face. We either like it or not, but we could talk about the nasty side of sport that we tend to kind of keep on the hush and we don't speak about it. But that is a major issue we face. If you come out of school, you're educated, and the thing you must understand, most of those individuals, well, that has been changing drastically, but most of the individuals who head sporting organizations, they don't really have a sporting background other than playing. In terms of the education background, the experience, and the skill set, a lot of them don't have it. It's just individuals that probably used to play in the sport, they were involved in the sport, they became popular via some kind of mechanism, and they have a good following, so they're elected to the head. There's nothing in there that mandates for you to have either, if you want to be a president, you need X level of experience, you need to have sport administrative degree or something of the sort. So those individuals, of course, they feel threatened by somebody who's coming out who is qualified in certain areas of sport. And that is a major issue. That is why they don't take volunteers. And I think for that to change, we need to educate our people.
But I know earlier, though, you say how you all put on this conference and that conference on the next conference, people taking the education?
People are taking it. The problem is what you tend to see, you find the same set of people coming over and over again. And again, it's not just about attending the conference. It's what you take away from the conference and how you apply it to your sporting organization. It makes no sense going to a conference just to say, you know what, I went to that conference. And if you ask them, most times you have person going to X, Y, and Z conference. But do you apply what you learned to your organization? And I think that is a major, because one of the things I would also add as well, and we're doing, the Faculty of Sport is doing a course right now, a governance course with America's Netball. So all of the affiliates throughout the region are doing a practical course in governance and leadership. So we touch on the components of strategic planning, communications planning, stakeholder and team management, and other items that basically involve sport administration. When you make it an applied thing, you ask individuals to then, their assignments, another core components of the course would be to focus on their administrations and work with their administrations to help develop whatever they learn within the conference. So I think that is the next way to go now, as opposed to just having the conference, have it in a manner that individuals are forced to take in projects from their associations, work on them, bring them to the table, and illustrate that they have truly understood what we have said or what we have taught at those conferences. So that may be something to consider as well for you.
Is it at these conferences, it's just anybody who could come, or is there a targeted approach to NGBs as well?
This one was actually initiated by America's Netball. They came to the Faculty of Sport. They wanted to develop that program.
So what I meant to ask, sorry, when you all do courses, etc., outside of people coming to you all, do you all attack the NGBs directly as well, the executives?
We do, depending on what forum. So generally for the forums, from the time COVID had started, we had a plethora of forums. So we would send out the information disseminated through the ministries and the various NGBs. The problem is for the higher end courses or programs where persons have to pay for it, that is where we're seeing the issue. So in terms of trying to get assistance for the NGBs, we would normally either ask TTOC, the First Citizen Sports Foundation, or even the ministry then, to partner with us to have those collaborations so that it can be made available to NGBs, because we know financing is an issue. Given the current situation, we know financing is tight, so that hasn't materialized. Up to 2 days ago, we had a meeting with the dean, and what he was saying was that for future forums, what we're going to look for is title sponsors, so that they can then sponsor the events and then make it available to national governing bodies throughout the region for free. So that is something we are looking at. But to be honest with you, what we find, if it is free, persons will attend, as long as they have to pay. And in most instances, when you have to bring in professionals to teach, you have to pay for it. Most persons would not attend, again, understanding financing. So that is more or less the issue we're facing right now.
Financing or value?
I think value is there, because with the faculty, what we tend to do, as opposed to just having a forum.
Sorry. Is it that, do you think that some people don't appreciate the value of it? That's why they don't want to pay for it?
Well, I think that too. It's one thing to say, you know what, I'm going to this either forum, I'm going to this conference because I can learn a lot from it, and I want to apply what I've learned. It's another thing to just go to that just to say, you know what, I attended that forum and put it on a CV. And that is the problem, because you need to identify, okay, what skill sets am I lacking? What do I need to move my administration or my association forward? And until you get to that point and recognize, okay, these are the skill sets we need, this is what we need to develop, it's going to be all for naught, because you won't understand the value in it.
So when we get into that point where we're wrapping up the segment, any final words to those NGBs about anything that you didn't say before regarding the regulatory framework and the need for having a regulatory and policy framework within the organization?
Again, the importance, I cannot stress on the importance of that at all, because we tend, a lot of the times what we try to do is, a lot of those strategic plans, for instance, we don't develop them to actually implement them. We develop them so that we can submit it to the sport company so we can get funding. And that is where the problem lies. If you're not going to articulate the document and commit to it, then it's pointless. Even though we submit those documents, in fact, if you look at the operations and what we send in the strategic plan, in most times they're different from each other. What the plan is and what we're doing, there's no connection. And I think until we realize, for us to truly move forward, we need to articulate a plan, as well as the steps in terms of how we're going to achieve what we have in our plan. If you don't do that, then you're just wasting your time, because you're just going to be using money, and there's no end in sight in terms of what is the clear-cut path for the development or the trajectory for development for your organization. So I would just stress them, as opposed to just doing those documents, your governing documents, your policies, to fulfill a reporting requirement, focus on doing it right. Get your stakeholder input, get consultations with your stakeholders, get everybody involved to articulate a proper vision and mission, identify your objectives, sit together, put together a proper plan, go into your operational framework, articulate your operational plans, and move forward to move your sport forward, if you understand what I'm saying. As opposed to just doing it and living out there, that doesn't serve anybody.
Mr. Kervin Jean, well, that's my name out. Every time I call him Mr. Jean, he's not Mr. Jean? Sorry, just
not Mr. Jean. Hopefully by the end of next year I'll finish with it, but I don't have time to sit down and finish it at this point.
Oh, the doctorate?
Yeah, I'll get to it eventually.
We'll get to it eventually. So very soon, hopefully soon, we'll call you doctor.
We'll stick to the Kervin, man. Kervin is good.
Kervin is fine. The guy from St. Lucia.
That's right.
Right. So thank you very much, Kervin Jean, for the discussion on having a policy framework in place. I hope persons listen, and I hope persons who tuned in, got some vital information. Thank everybody for tuning into this edition of Kervin Callaloo, and see you again next week. Thank you again, Kervin.
Thanks, man. No problem. My pleasure.